Hi, folks. You're with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the productivity. What does productivity mean in terms of economic productivity, national productivity, that sort of thing? What does it mean? How do we define it? And how do we achieve um, improved outcomes in relation to productivity? Now, something that I'll be upfront about, the globalists, when they use improvement in productivity, is how we're going to avoid recession, how we're going to increase standards of living, and those sorts of things. Now, in a classic sort of economic sense, that's true. If productivity is improved, but that's not what they mean. They're not looking at improvements in productivity as we've hitherto known. So productivity improvements, or productivity, has become a term like flexibility or white supremacy or racism or hate speech. It's morphed into another universe of where it can mean whatever you want it to mean. It actually has no definition. It's applied to silence sensible discussion and sensible debate. So the world's going to end in the next 5 minutes. Oh, you really think so? So you're a climate denier. Because if you're a climate denier, it means you're a fascist. If you're a fascist, it means you're a Nazi. And if you're a Nazi, it means you're Hitler. And it's that sort of thing. So productivity is used in that sort of same sense. It has no definition. It can be applied to any situation. So if somebody complains about standard of living declining, well, productivity has to improve. That's it. So you shut the fuck up, motherfucker. And how do you argue with that? Well, what is productivity? How do you define it? What does it even mean? So that's how it's being used. Now let's have a look at productivity in a sort of traditional sense. Productivity in a manufacturing economy, for example, refers to, or primarily at least refers to the goods you produce. Now, when you have a product, a physical product you're manufacturing, you can add value to that product, such as more features and more performance, more bells and whistles, and to the extent to which you can add that extra value without adding an additional cost or a much smaller relative cost, then you've achieved a productivity gain. Or if you can, through better organization and management, say, well, we're going to produce 1,000 widgets, but you can do that at a lower cost than the guys down the road, or on a national basis, a lower cost than some other country can. And that lower cost of production could be a better trained workforce. It could be a better educated workforce. It could be better access to raw materials. It could just be better management and better organization. It could be better machinery and plant and equipment. And so on and so forth. So there can be various. So you can produce that 1,000 widgets for $1 a piece, but the guys down in another country, it's $2 a piece to produce the widget. Therefore, other things being equal, the product quality being on or about the same, then you've achieved a productivity increase in a net sense, and therefore the standard of living that your population enjoys, given you have a manufacturing economy, of course, is that every company can produce its widgets at a good quality or a higher quality or a lower cost. Now, you can go in another direction and say, well, our widgets have a much higher level of value add. They have super performance characteristics, but for only slightly more money than the much lower performance unit, therefore. Or there can be other things like distribution value add, where you can get your products out into all the shops, onto all the shelves, so people can just walk in and buy it, or online they can order it off the shelf, so it's always there the next day or a couple of days, that sort of thing. So there's the improved distribution and value add through other means. So productivity can be achieved through various means on that in that sense. Now, we've got Western governments, globalists control Western governments now. We've got to increase productivity. Now, they say this at the same time as they're falsely claiming there's a labour shortage. There is not. There is not a labour shortage. They're falsely claiming there is a skills shortage. There is not. There is no skill shortage. And whatever skill shortage may exist, it's very short term and temporary and could be easily fixed by adjustments to local training and local training schools and training programs and apprenticeship programs and so on. So there is, and the amount that would be affected is very small and quite transient. So there's no skill shortage. So the globalists are forcing without the consent of the Western population, forcing masses of black and brown illiterate peasants onto the West. Now, at the same time, they're claiming that productivity has to increase if our standard of living in the West is to improve, or if recession is to be avoided, and these sorts of things. So now that's an absurd proposition to say productivity has to improve. And by the way, we're bringing over gazillions of illiterate third world rural peasants who are illiterate in their own language, let alone English, who have zero skills, zero education, and they're the ones that are going to improve the productivity of the economy. What a load of absolute fucking nonsense. They're actually trying this on. No one in the media is calling them out. The globalist control media. No one's calling this out, but it should be. I mean, in a functioning democracy, our politicians would be piling in on this and just saying what absolute rubbish and dismissing it out of hand, which is what should be happening. The media similarly would be all over it, saying what absolute crap and nonsense it is, but they're not. The globalists control all the bodies politic and the media, so no one's calling it out. So productivity, how do they mean productivity? Well, I go back to nearly 20 years ago now, where there was an editor from one of the big financial journals and of international repute. And this guy who was, early 30s, private school, wealthy private school education, married into money, and had been given. This guy is getting paid like over $1 million US a year plus bonuses, and he's married into money anyway. And his idea of a tough time is only having 2 shopping trips a month to Paris instead of 3. And he's come to do a talk, and he's talking to the people in the room as if they were a bunch of fucking serfs. And he just had this manner about him, which I mean, he was okay. He's got nothing to worry about. It's the rest of us who got the problem. And he just said, look, your standard of living the world is globalizing. Nothing you can do to stop it. Too bad if you don't like it. And find a tall building if you've got a problem with this. And the world's globalizing. Your standard of living will decline because now you first world workers are going to be competing with third world peasants. And therefore, you either have to accept a 40% reduction in standard of living over the next couple of decades, or you have to work 40% harder to have the same standard of living. So he postulated that say for example, the average the work week is 40 hours, for example. He's saying you have to work 56 approximately hours a week for the same pay. If you want to, or 56 hours a week rather, if you want to maintain the same standard of living, as in your purchasing power will be declining, and it's only through an extra 16 hours of work a week that you can maintain the same purchasing power as you had previously. In fact, it's actually worse than that. I'd say you have to work 62, 63 hours plus to maintain the same purchasing power as we had 20 years ago, particularly when it comes to purchasing real estate or paying rent, or energy for that matter now. Or he said you can work the same amount of hours and have a 40% reduction in living standards. I think it's, again, a 50% plus reduction in living standards. But the guy wasn't far off. And he just said, well, that's how it is. Nothing to talk about. Now, how he can see that far into the future, he's very well plugged. He's a globalist stooge, and so is his fucking the Financial Journal. He was I think he still is the editor of. So he was able to predict quite accurately, really, 20 years into the future. And this guy's no genius. There's nothing, he's above average intelligence, I guess. He's had a decent education, but one shouldn't misunderstand his blasé confidence for genius or something like that. That's just simply not so. The guy's not that bright. So he's been at the World Economic Forum meetings or the globalist meetings where they said, well, this is the plan we've got for the West. This is how we're going to play it out, because they've got that much control. They can actually plan it, a bit like a Soviet communist central secretariat. They can plan into the future. Now, it's just fucking 20 years. The communists tried to plan 5 years into the future and couldn't do it. These guys can actually look ahead 20 years. And what they speculate on, it actually comes to pass. It's not speculating. They've planned it, for fuck's sake. They've planned the mass migration of people. So productivity, coming back to that, the productivity, what they mean is the productivity of mass capital. So the big lumps of money, if you like, bouncing around the world. When they say productivity, that's what they mean. That the mass capital, the big money, can make a return, and so their capital, their money, is productive. Not that it's productive in any other way. For example, by moving manufacturing from, say, a first world country to somewhere like India, the productivity, that is the manufacturing productivity, the ability to produce an item at a certain quality at a certain price in a certain time, given certain funds employed. So now, in a manufacturing sense, in a manufacturing sense, moving it to a third world country like India, the productivity declines by 75 to 80% in productive output. So instead of needing one person to make the widget, you need 5 people to make the widget. Instead of having a certain amount of raw materials there, you have to have twice as many raw materials, because of the poor quality of the raw materials means there's a high reject rate, and so on. And various organizational inefficiencies, such as getting stuff from the factory to the ports and then off to market onto the ships, so it's distributed around the world. These sorts of things. So the productivity declines substantially, but the productivity of capital improves. So you get a higher productivity because you've got to buy fewer machines because the labor is so cheap. You've got to buy fewer machines. You've got far fewer government regulations to meet. You can pollute rivers and streams that you couldn't do in the West, and the list goes on of the little incremental savings here and there. Therefore, capital. So the big money end of town, they can employ a smaller amount of capital and have a much higher return on that capital relative to capital employed than they could in the West. Now, the primary differential, 2 primary differentials, are: one is the cheap cost of labour, and thus you don't need to buy as many machines, because some of these machines are quite pricey. So you don't need to buy as many machines, and of course, fewer regulations to worry about, government regulations to worry about, whether it be employment regulations or health and safety regulations, regulations around pollution and things like that. So this is what the globalists mean, that their capital, because the globalists, if anything, are the owners of mass capital. That's, if they're nothing else, they're that. And so productivity in their cognizance means the higher proportional return on funds employed. It doesn't mean productivity of labour or work or anything like that. It doesn't mean that. Now, it does mean in one sense that flooding the market with cheap labour means you've got then a lower relative labour cost. So there's that factor, but that's not the primary or any significant factor. It's one, but so say with things like if you look at energy is increasingly becoming a monopoly controlled, whether it be energy, access to water, all of this sort of thing. It's increasingly centralizing and being completely controlled by mass capital, which are agents of the globalists, or are the globalists. And so they're able to control all the essentials that we must have. We can't survive without water or energy. And the globalists increasingly are gaining monopoly, oligopoly control over this, and they can decide what we have to pay, and then they're looking at, well, what can they afford to pay? How much can we squeeze out of them? So they're not even competing. It's gone in reverse now. It's we control it. How much can we squeeze out of them, out of the populace, to let them have access to water? And it could be turning out like it is in third world countries, where there's one central well for the whole village. You want water, you got to go to the well or the hand pump to get it out. And I'm wondering if we're actually moving back to those feudal times, or some sort of approximation of it. So if we look at, say, the Green New Deal, now nearly all the green schemes, whether it be the windmills, the solar panels or anything else, it's very much controlled by the prime globalist shaker movers, and the big money end of town. Now they're able to put all that money in there, go to the Western governments that they control, and say, okay, we want you to subsidize this to make it profitable for us. Because it's simply not profitable. It doesn't do the job. It doesn't deliver. It's absolutely fucking useless, the Green New Deal stuff as it's going. Now, one day I'm sure the technology will exist, but certainly not now. So all these sort of things being put in place and heavily subsidized by the government. The government is then passing the cost of that subsidy on to the cheap, efficient energy that comes from things like nuclear power and coal power and so on, and saying that the people, the consumer, have to pay to subsidize the Green New Deal technology that these already fantastically rich globalists are making a fortune of. So they want productivity. So they want to be able to invest money anywhere and have Western governments make legislation to protect their, not only their investment so they don't lose their shirts, but to ensure that they have windfall returns. So when they talk about productivity, that's what they mean, that they have windfall returns on funds employed. It's not about labor productivity, but and to whatever extent it is about labor productivity, it's only the extent that wages have to fall relative to cost of the paycheck. The purchasing power of the paycheck must be on a steady decline, to ensure that the globalist capital mass continues to make its windfall returns. And whether this comes to rigging labour markets, rigging the stock market, rigging the real estate market, whatever they touch, it is artificially stacked and rigged to ensure that the mass capital has control of the situation and can protect their investment and ensure the windfall returns. So when they talk about productivity, they don't mean productivity. They mean productivity of their capital and guaranteed no lose and guaranteed high returns. That's what they're talking about. And that's why our standard of living is going into the toilet. You've been with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for listening.